During that time, Jane was also the director of Kelvin College Student Volunteer Services and referred to herself and did the work of community catalyst. So she has a great love for the Heartside community, and that's kind of what brought her into the position of a board member for Dwelling Place back in 1980. Our third panelist is Dave Gibbs. Dave Gibbs was also an original board member. He's a CPA, and he served as the treasurer of the board back when he was on the board back in 1980. He was a member of Westminster Presbyterian Church, and that was one of the founding organizations of Dwelling Place. And then last but definitely not least is Gail Sewell. Gail Sewell was the first president of the Dwelling Place Board. He is often credited with conceptualizing Dwelling Place as an organization and the work that we're doing. And back when we were founded, all of the original founding organizations assigned or appointed a member to serve on the board. So Dale was the appointed member to serve on the Dwelling Place Board, appointed from Westminster Presbyterian. And last is Denny. You all know Denny. He's our current CEO, and he's going to be the moderator for the panel today. And we've had a lot of fun, like I said, getting to chat with everybody in these last couple of weeks, preparing for this call. And I hope you're all really excited to hear the information. And with that, Denny, I'm going to hand it over to you. But some quick housekeeping. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And at this time, I'm going to recommend that everybody goes up to the right-hand corner of their screen, and there's a little box that says either speaker view or gallery view. And I'm going to recommend that you click on speaker view, or you change that so that speaker view is what you're seeing. And if you are on speaker view, then you should only be seeing my lovely face right now. And when I hand it over to Denny, you'll only be seeing his face. We're going to do this view so that you can identify who is speaking as we'll go through the panelists. Jenny will ask the questions, and each of the panelists will take turns responding to those questions, so you'll be able to identify who is speaking at that time. And with that, if there's not any other questions for now, we'll hand it over to Denny. And be sure to use the chat function to ask any questions, because we will have some time at the end of the call for open Q&A from board members, staff, or maybe some other tidbits our panelists want to share. Denny? Okay, welcome everyone, and welcome to our panel today. I'm really excited about this. I've been with Dwelling Place longer than any other employee at this point, for 32 years. So I know a lot of the history, but I don't have a lot of the early history. And I'm gonna remind people who are on the call, please put yourself on mute. I could hear some background from somebody. I don't know who it is, but someone's got their mute off, and we're hearing conversations going on wherever you are. So please do that. I'm going to kind of take you back a little bit, and then I will be asking each of the panelists to introduce themselves a little bit about who they are and what brought them to the organization in the first place to help form it. But before I do that, I want to just say, I want you to take a moment and imagine a little bit here with me. So today, Dwelling Place has more than 70 staff, with about a $10 million budget. Our total net assets, or known assets, are now reaching a point where it's almost to $200 million, with 36 different properties and over 100,000 square feet of commercial space. And we're in 4 counties, as all of you on the call know. And we've recently embarked on a new line of business, a new venture with a community land trust, which is going to get us into home ownership, into the home ownership area for permanent affordable housing. And this is really exciting. But it didn't all start like that. Every new organization starts somewhere. So I want you to imagine trying to start something like Dwelling Place from scratch, with the conditions in this neighborhood. The Heartside neighborhood is where Dwelling Place started. And imagine the conditions, and we're going to hear more about the conditions in the neighborhood at that time from some of our panelists.
and how you launch a big idea like this with very little cash on hand. I've often said to our board members coming on and to staff that way back when this was put together, a lot of people were wondering why the concerns about gentrification or development in the Hartside neighborhood, because it was in such bad shape. We're wondering why anyone would even be worried about gentrification of this neighborhood at the time. And I'm just going to say today, all those founders and people who were concerned about those issues today look like prophets to many of us, because they were somehow able to see and imagine that change would come to the Hartside neighborhood into Grand Rapids, and gentrification was a real possibility. But because of dwelling place, that hasn't happened in the Hartside neighborhood and in many other neighborhoods in the city of Grand Rapids and across four counties. So if you can, again, put your imagination hat on, thinking about what it was like, what it might have been like to start a new organization like this. We're going to hear from all four of our panelists about who are actually there while it happens. So first, I'd like to introduce Jane Vanderplug and have Jane talk a little bit about herself and what brought her to this. We're going to have some very pointed questions to give to each of them, but everybody has a story here to tell. And that's what Dwelling Place loves to do lately, is tell stories, because that's how we learn more and more about what's the best thing to do and why we're here. So Jane, you want to tell a little bit about yourself and what brought you to Dwelling Place in the first place? Thank you.
Okay. Greetings. Good to have some time with you all. I'm really happy to see how long you've lived and that you're 70 strong. I happen to be a business owner of 68 employees here in Portland, Oregon. We have communication headsets for workers in challenging high noise environments. And my work has been organization development and community relations for 36 years. 37, I guess. But my real work is that of a serial entrepreneur in both the social space and business. I began exploring Grand Rapids cultures in earnest on my bike when I was 14, and I volunteered at Degge and at Campus Life, which was in the Moose Lodge, and also hung out at the powwows and the art festivals, and even worked with the nuns in a childcare thing, in a program called New Horizons. So my love for Hartside and town really began early. I was hired at Hartside in 1977 by Ron Vanderplug, wrote a grant which paid for the Grand Rapids Foundation, covered my salary as a community organizer for 2 years. And then I got invited by Dale to consider what do we need to do about the big housing issues that we saw. My love was getting to know the people and creating residence groups, the kind of engagement I think you're doing now.
Thank you, Jane. And I'll go next to Reverend Gail Sewell, who by most accounts was the kind of the predecessor to the executive director, doing a lot of organizing work around this with folks to get the idea of Dwelling Place put together. So Dale, talk a little bit about yourself and a little bit of that history.
Okay. Thanks a lot for having this event. Are you hearing me all right or no?
Yeah.
All right, then why am I still looking at Denny instead of me?
Oh, I can see you in the main screen.
All right. Well, I don't need to see me. Let's see. I was only in Grand Rapids from fall of 1975 to the fall of 1961, or 81. So, just 6 years, but those were really crucial and interesting years because Hartside started, I think, in 1976 and Dwelling Place in 1980. So a really interesting time to be there. My memory of how the idea of Dwelling Place got started is not so much that it was my idea as that the idea emerged. from the Heartside neighborhood and from Jane's work and from dialogue with the churches. And I've always been the kind of person who likes to dream the impossible dream and cares a lot about the marginalized people. And my head's never been turned much by wealth. And I think all people should be respected, and that extends to housing should be secure and things like that. Some of my work has been outside the church. A lot of it has been taking the church outside of itself. And I think Heartside and Dwelling Place were an example of that. I was actually at Westminster Presbyterian as a pastor for youth and family ministries. And then that got extended as the Heartside Neighborhood Association began to the community minister. So those first years were really exciting years. I do think the idea came out of the community and the church dialogue more than out of me, but I was always one to jump on an idea and believe in it. So I feel like I get a lot of credit for being the visionary, but it was a group vision, and I didn't do any of the hard work. So, but thanks for all your accolades anyhow.
Well, thank you, David, or Dale. Next, we'll go to Dave Gibbs. I was lucky enough to spend some time with Dave because he stayed on the board and involved with Dwelling Place a lot longer than the other three panelists. Dave and I've gotten to know each other over the years. But Dave, why don't you talk a little bit about your involvement and how you got started with Dwelling Place?
Well, Sandy and I came to Grand Rapids in 1963 for a job with a CPA firm, and I worked with that firm until 1979, and then went to work for Owen Ames Kimball, a construction company, as its chief financial officer. And we were in Grand Rapids since the early 60s then, and went to Westminster Presbyterian Church, and found that a wonderful connection for us, both personally and spiritually. And our kids had Dale as their youth pastor in the late 70s. And so I changed jobs in 79, and in 1980, Dale and I were friends with Gene Myers, who was also one of the original board members. And when Dwelling Place was getting started, Dale asked both Gene and myself to be on the board. And I didn't have any idea what was going to happen, except I was a CPA, and so I became treasurer. And when you talk about little money at the beginning, we had no money at the beginning, but somebody, Dale, I don't know who, filled out applications to the Catholic Human Development Organization, the Grand Rapids Foundation, and then the National Presbyterian Church. And we received 3 grants with money enough to pay an executive director, I think, for 3 years. You have to correct me if I'm wrong, Dale, but so we were able to hire who it turned out to be Chuck, but somebody had to fill out those original applications. And so my hat is off to them, because then you could write a payroll check and know it would clear the bank, which for a CPA, that's a big deal. So I was right there at the beginning to help, not really understanding exactly what we were going to do. But we got Chuck Calati, who was an amazing executive director for those, I think, maybe 3 years he was with us, 4 maybe. And he did amazing things in a very short period of time. And he always had to deal with the government. So that means lots of paperwork. And he could turn out paperwork like I've never, I've spent 40 years being a CPA, and I never saw any equal to Chuck and his ability to get things done. So that's my beginning. And I thought the dream was, the dream of Dwelling Place came as an And the proposal to the United Presbyterian Church came from Dale because he had seen a grant request at the National Presbyterian Church level, which he thought was a bit, I guess, frivolous. And he said, well, we've got this great idea in Grand Rapids. Why don't I apply? Or why don't we apply for a housing ministry to prevent the displacement of the people who live in the Hartside area? So if you did those applications, Dale, thank you, or whoever did. That was a lot of credit to them.
Thank you, David. And let's go to Chuck Calati now. Chuck's had some internet challenges as he and his wife are competing for bandwidth at his house. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to hear from Chuck to talk a little bit about why he decided to leave a good paying job as an executive director of another organization to take on an organization that had no cash or very little. Chuck. Is he still on mute?
There he is. Can you hear us, Chuck? We can't hear you, Chuck. I see him talking.
All right. Why don't you see what you can do with Chuck on the side, Latricia, and then we'll see if we can get him back into the call here. In the meantime, I could go to the other panelists for some of the questions, all right?
Sounds good.
All right, so we'll see if we can get Chuck back. Imagine that you couldn't talk to me, folks, or hear me. What would your day be like? Well, this is, Chuck's the first director, and I know Chuck well enough to know he's a good talker too. So anyway, we'll see if we can get back to him in a minute. So much for Zoom calls and technology here. In any case, let me start at questions. We've already talked a little bit about the idea of forming Dwelling Place. But just if there's anything anybody wants to add to elaborate on that in terms of the vision part of it. I mean, we've talked a little about what brought you to it, but what was your hopes and dreams for this organization? What did you really think it was going to accomplish? I know Dave said, I'm not sure what we were going to do. He got kind of brought in because he was a CPA, but I also know David well enough from the years that I worked with him to know that there was personal mission for you, David. I remember talking to you about that, about why you stuck with it through the hard times and all that sort of thing too. So if some of you, we'll let, maybe I'll go round robin with it. Jane, do you have anything you want to add on that? You can always pass if you don't, but about your vision for what you hoped it would become. You're on mute, Jane.
I had spent a lot of my time with the residents of the old hotels, especially the Oaks and the Westin. And Guiding Light Mission, Ed Osterhaus was leader then, as well as Jack Koopmans, I think, of Degage. And they kept bringing up the concern about more and more homeless. The state hospitals were just starting to empty out, and people were showing up very needy for better housing. My dream was really based on what it's been debated. I think Bill Duncan suggested the name Dwelling Place, and he asked me to vote on it and choose it. But it comes from Ephesians 2. It says, so then you both have access to one Spirit in the Father, and you are no longer strangers or aliens, but you're fellow citizens with the saints and members of the house of God. And built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole structure being joined together grows into a holy temple in the Lord. In him you also are being built together as a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. And we really had a heart, those of us who started talking and praying together, we sensed that these are our brothers and sisters and we needed to figure out housing for them. And we also were getting an idea of the influence of potential historic preservation downtown and the entrepreneurial goals of John Hughie and other people. And we just saw that we better get ahead of the game. And as my response to the turmoils of the 60s was to become a proactive community developer, because I wasn't a protester or an activist in that way, like my older sister, who was a lawyer eventually. So it was in my blood to be a builder and a church connector and an educator. And it was a great fit all around. I was a Calvin College student who had spent a semester in Chicago and saw the effect of homelessness there.
I'll ask the same question about your hope and vision, Dale and Dave both. Dale, what was your hope or vision that you thought would happen or could come out of forming Dwelling Place?
Well, a lot of it is what Jane said, listening to the community. One thing I would say is I doubt there would be a Dwelling Place if there hadn't first been a Heartside Neighborhood Association, because our dialogue with them and seeking to respect them as neighbors in the community and secure their dwelling place there was a big part of it. And another big part of it, as Jane said, was the faith community. We had the faith community ecumenically pretty much with us, or at least willing to not speak their skepticism about our idealism, I guess you would say. And that was both in terms of the church institutions, there are many of them involved, and in terms of some really solid Christian individuals in the business community. So we had all that backing at the beginning, and it really was very much a faith expression for us. At the time, it was not interfaith at the time, but very much the ideals of Christian faith have both compassion and respect for all people, and also justice for those who didn't have all the power they needed to secure themselves. That was a big part of our motive and our vision, but my vision actually was not real, it was smaller. In fact, I did write the grant to the Presbyterian Church, and the motivation, as I remember it, was there had been a Presbyterian church, I think down Jefferson Avenue, south, beyond Heartside, but it was the only African-American Presbyterian church in the area. And the presbytery closed it, sold the building, took the money and invested in a church in Forest Hills. And I was so mad about that, that's a resource gone from our neighborhood. And then the money from the resource spent way the heck out there by Ada. And so kind of in anger, I wrote this proposal. In my mind, it was for $80,000, but that may not be true. I think it was a major part of the funding for the first 3 years. And fortunately, Heartside had just done a lot of demographic stuff, and I had demographic statistics, I had maps, I had graphs, from Heartside, and I just threw them all into a proposal. And my proposal was to buy a building on Division Avenue and at least secure one building there. And that was pretty naive. Fortunately, the answer was no, we will not fund a building, but yes, we will give you money to hire a director, which was much smarter. And we hired Chuck, and things just took off after hiring the right guy at the right time was really important. Plus having all these people together working on this vision.
Thanks, Dale. And I want to move it to Dave Gibbs. Dave Gibbs, to give Dave a chance to talk about, maybe it's not the vision you had when you started because you weren't sure quite why you were there, except for your accounting background. But what you thought about where it might go after you learned a bit about the mission and the organization, the opportunity there, David.
Here we go. I got the mute off. That's helpful. I saw the need, talking with Dale and others and Jane, I saw that the need was there, and it seemed to me logical that displacement was going to be the result of the improvements in the Hartside area. And this was long before the arena and long before actually the Grand Center. The city built the Grand Center in DeVos Hall that completed in '79. And so I think the city, and the report from the Hartside Neighborhood Association is dated September 11th of 1979 about the neighborhood and with a bunch of recommendations. And that was done in connection with the city, because the city had, if you will, tackled the different areas of Grand Rapids, going all the way back to the 60s when it did its urban redevelopment, and then through the 70s, and then 80s seemed to be the time to focus on the Hartside area. And I knew the people that lived there needed help, and I felt called to be part of that helping. And with the job change I described, I had the ability to have a schedule so that I could be there for the 8 a.m. meetings and the 5 o'clock meetings and everything else, do all the phone calls and everything else that's required of an active volunteer.
Okay, thanks, Dave. It feels like, or looks like we got Chuck back, or at least a voice version of him. So Chuck, if you're there, I'd like to ask everybody to mute themselves except for Chuck. And Chuck, talk a little bit about your getting involved with Dwelling Place and what brought you there.
I was, at the time, I was the director of the campaign, or the Catholic Human Development Office, which was located in Hartside. And let me mute my other computer here. Hopefully that won't mute me. Okay. All right. Can you hear me okay without feedback?
We can hear you now. Just make sure you mute your computer while you're talking.
I just did.
All right. We can hear you great, Chuck. Thank you.
All right. Let me make sure all of the microphones are off. Life is not as always easy as it used to be.
You sound good to us, Chuck.
Okay, but I'm getting feedback, so I'm trying to, let me try to turn off this microphone on the computer. Of course, it won't let me do it. Okay, I'm still getting it. All right, you can hear me okay now?
Yes, we can hear you great now.
Okay. Back to where I was. Yes, I was executive director of the Catholic Human Development Office, which also was located in Hartside at the time. And we got a proposal from the task force. It was Center City Task Force, and they sent it to us at the Human Development Office for some funding. And I presented it to our board, and I looked at it and thought it was a great idea. It was a great idea. So I ended up going ahead and funding it. We only put in a few dollars, I think, like maybe $10,000. And I'm still fooling around because I'm getting feedback, and so let me just get rid of that. Okay, I'm not using the computer's not hearing me, so if you can hear me, that's great. So anyway, we gave the money, and I looked at the proposal, and I thought it's going to take somebody that knows the local politics, how to get funding from federal government, and other attributes that I had honed over 10 years. And I thought, well, this might be kind of fun because I had worked with the diocese when I first started. There were 27 counties, and we worked with everybody from the Native Americans up north to inner city kids and people and rural problems. And our whole goal was to try to improve conditions for disadvantaged people, no matter what race or religion they were. So, and when I was at the diocese, I also just got involved in doing some housing for the diocese, and found out that it was actually a lot easier to get money from that than it was for some of the other projects we had worked on. And so when the bishop told me not to do any more housing projects for seniors, I decided it was time to find a new challenge. And the Heartside project looked like something where I could bring my talents to one area. And I was impressed by the caliber of people that were on the board. They came from, like Dave, in terms of finance and managing finances, though we had operated with some pretty complicated budgets. But it also got me into a great relationship with O&M's Kimball Company, and some of the other board members also had real skills. I got my real estate license while I was there under Gene Myers from Westminster. I had a lot of information from, I just forgot his name, Norm DeGraff, who had his own insurance agency. Also was on the board again as a Christian businessman type. He wasn't looking to expand his businesses, but to offer his skills to assist us in doing what we were doing. So all of that came together, and I applied and got the position, and enjoyed the time I spent in the choir loft at Westminster Presbyterian Church by myself, trying to put some deals together and listening to the bell ringers. So it was a fun start, and the rest we can talk about later, but that's what got me involved.
Thanks, Chuck. Why don't you put yourself on mute for a minute then, and we'll move around to some next questions. I want to make sure everybody knows if they have questions, you can put them into the chat box, and if you have, I'll try to cover a couple of them. It's not as if I was not around during that time. I was actually at the Catholic Human Development Office when Chuck left there, because he had hired me as his assistant director. at the Catholic Human Development Office, knowing that he might be leaving at some point in the near future. And I ended up as his successor at the Catholic Human Development Office, and I was there for 10 years. So I was seeing everything going on in the neighborhood at the time as well, not intimately involved with Dwelling Place, but certainly what was going on. Someone asked on the chat box about other conditions in the neighborhood that would have caused displacement. And I'm going to let panel members chime in here if you'd like, but I know that one of the issues that was going on, it was a very, very big issue in the 70s and 80s, was the deinstitutionalization of our state facilities for developmentally disabled and mentally ill folks. And many of those folks were being mainstreamed. They wanted to mainstream them into the communities, into group homes. And that didn't work out quite as they expected it to work out. And many of those folks did end up on the streets in the Hartside neighborhood and in other neighborhoods, which helped contribute to the tick up in the homeless population as well. But the neighborhood, I would let other people describe this too, but the neighborhood at the time was pretty well boarded up. There wasn't a lot of use of the buildings at that time, and so a lot of the old hotels that were turned into or had been for a long time a walk-up hotel rented by the week, sometimes the day even. Those were in private hands, not held by a nonprofit. And with all the development Dave talked about earlier, with the Grand Amway Plaza used to be the Pantlin Hotel, that renovation had been announced in the 70s and led to a bit of real estate speculation. And the concerns that I had heard about were that folks were worried that some of these privately owned hotels would go by the wayside as the real estate market tipped up. But I will let others on the call who were part of forming Dwelling Place give their 2 cents on that. And I'm going to open it up to anybody that wants to chime in to offer a couple of thoughts about the conditions. Why was there concerns about displacement?
Well,
Denny, go ahead, Jane.
I just say, at first I worked on a Hartside Business Alliance because they were complaining about shoppers not coming downtown. They didn't believe anybody would ever move in, but they were asking eventually for a walking street patrol, and so were the residents. So I went to the city manager, and we actually got the first ever walking street patrol put into Hartside for the city of Grand Rapids. And that was done in the summer of '78. And it we just tried to inspire the fact to the business owners that there could be so much more going on there, and they could do something regarding the housing. So some of them became real supporters once we got going. Go ahead, Dale, you know more.
I may know less, but I actually found out on the Dwelling Place website, or some stuff that Latricia sent us, that there had been riots at the corner of Division and Wealthy in 1967. Yeah. And that led to some white flight from the Hartside neighborhood, and that maybe you know, there were people leaving the neighborhood at that point in time. And I think by the time I was there in '75, people who were living there were feeling the threat in some way that their housing might go away. At the same time, it was not yet an attractive neighborhood. Everything on a lot of Division Avenue was boarded up. A lot of the mentally ill had been released and were in the neighborhood. And then we learned of the kind of the redevelopment ideas of some of the business people that I'm not sure I would call them predatory, but maybe I would. I don't know. Anyhow, so that's what I know about the situation at the time, and the instability and the fear that housing was going to be lost. And there wasn't, if I remember right, Jane, there weren't a lot of places where you could go if you lived in the Hartside neighborhood to get what you needed, the services you needed, or the hospital was there and the churches were there, but
Yeah.
I don't know where the grocery stores were or anything like that.
Yeah.
Chuck or Dave, do you want to add anything to that, to what's just been said? I'll take that as a no. I don't see anybody unmuting right now.
No, I'm
So-
sorry, I couldn't get,
Oh,
get
go ahead,
my
Dave.
mute thing off.
Go ahead.
So there were some businessmen who wanted to acquire properties in Hartside that they had a vision of those values increasing, and so they would benefit from that increase in values. But I went to my dwelling place storage box in the last couple of days and found an article in the Grand Rapids Magazine from November of 1981. And it interviewed Chuck. You might remember that, Chuck, and Bruce Poppin, John Hughey, a photographer called Pete DeRitter. And I just wanted to read you one of the quotes in the article that sort of typified what we were dealing with. Maybe not at the very first, but close on. Dwelling Place had purchased the Ralph Morris building on Ionia and Weston and the Metalcraft building at Weston and Commerce, and has a controversial plan to partition off 190 governmental subsidized housing units in the building. Businessmen throughout Hartside hate this latter plan. Bruce Poppin stated their case. It eventually will stifle future commercial development in the area. I get worked up in a real lather about it. So the real estate interest of the people that were interested in some of the properties came to light right away when we looked at those buildings to develop the Weston apartments. And I remember, just to finish that whole thought, I remember a meeting of the Hartside Neighborhood Association at the old location of the Holly Restaurant, which is now a parking lot for Westminster Church. And Westminster had a senior pastor, actually a pastor for seniors, Henry Jones, and his wife Maureen came to that meeting. They had spent 30 years in China dealing with the communists and everything that was going on with China. And he came to this meeting and helped secure the Hartside Neighborhood Association for Dwelling Place and helped us to move forward with the Weston project. And he really, in my mind, that was a movement of God, that he was able to be there and get that accomplished with his words that evening.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay.
Chuck,
Thank you.
Chuck, do you want to add anything to that? I see your picture there.
He's muted.
Okay. Well, you can jump in anytime you need to, Chuck. Don't know what's going on with that, but anyway.
Quickly, Chuck, you can press *6 to unmute in case you're having trouble muting on your phone. *6.
Thank you, Latricia. All right. There was another question in the chat box about when the Dwelling Place Foundation was formed, and that's actually separate from Dwelling Place. The Dwelling Place Foundation was formed in the 90s with the intent that we would raise some money or create an entity where legacy gifts might be contributed to. Right now, the Dwelling Place Foundation has about 1.3 million in assets in the foundation, and it has made grants for everything from security deposits to staff supports and other kinds of things out of that foundation. They just had a meeting last week. and so, or earlier this week, actually, Wednesday. So that's where the foundation came from, and that was the purpose of it originally. That was another question in the chat box. I think Jane mentioned it, and so did Dave, and I think Chuck maybe or Dale did too, about a few, Bruce Poppin, John Hughey. I asked Chuck about opposition at one point, and he said, you know, except for those articles in the paper, it was mostly support for what was going on. So I would ask, again, if we can get Chuck to talk a little bit about what he saw as support or lack of support or conflict that the organization had in trying to get it off the ground from the neighborhood, the community, business interests, and so on and so forth. Chuck, do we have it? Okay, I guess we're going to have a future all Chuck show when we get him to an internet connection that he could, because he was there for 4 years, but I can tell you from being the CEO here for 32 years that it is, you know, the executive director and CEO get a ringside seat to all of the things that go on in an organization inside and out. And Chuck, I'm sure, has lots of stories he could share with us. Sorry about the technical difficulties we're having here. Let me go, it's 2:50. I want to make sure we get all the questions answered too, and we're going to get out of here within an hour. By the way, this is being recorded, so we can get this to other people. And if there's a,
Denny,
go ahead.
it's Dale. I would just like to say, I was only there through the fall of '81. But on the other side of it, I was surprised how many things went well and how many people came forward to support. And Dave mentioned the construction company OAK, and their support was huge. I think they gave us a building or offered us a building or something like that. But
Yeah.
from my point of view, somewhat naively perhaps, I thought, boy, this is really going well compared to, you know, what could have happened. And that goes, in a way, that goes back to our faith experience. Some of you know that picture of the hot air balloon lifting the whale, and that was kind of our way of saying some kind of spiritual intervention or something has got to come along with us. And it's really seemed, Dave said it, you know, when Henry Jones did what he did in the Heartside meeting, that seemed like a God thing. We had a lot of things that seemed to us as people of faith as God things kind of opening the way. And the support was loud by a few people. I got in trouble for calling John Hughey a fool one time. and I shouldn't do that. But, you know, so much went well.
Yeah. I have our original brochure, and it's in that supply that's in the link. But our theme was, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. And we were working really hard. We had every Thursday morning, 7:30 a.m. meeting at Westminster. We did 15 meetings in 6 months and came up with a 2-year strategic plan. And both Dale and I moved away in '81 in the fall, and I came back after 3 years, and it was more than accomplished. It was astounding to see what we had done. We had just been offered that burned out building that Dave brought to the table. And that proposal Chuck mentioned was the proposal the business people were shocked about. But we also had a huge threat, which I think was the biggest hard thing to deal with. And that was, once people saw we were real, they wanted to put some agendas on us that we weren't equipped to handle or wanted to handle immediately. And that especially was the group homes. And I know Dennis kind of inherited that. One of our advisors was saying, we've got so many people to cover, let's get into it. So there was a lot, I call it, that's always a challenge when you're starting to discern what's the right path and what to say no to. And we got to those hurdles pretty well too, until, of course, the group home and the Kent County Social Services started leaning on us too much.
Thank you, Jane. And for those on the call who aren't familiar with that, we're actually trying to do some archival work now to summarize or capsulize some of the history in these various pieces of time in the organization. At one point, Dwelling Place operated group homes for the folks who were being deinstitutionalized, for folks with mental illnesses and developmental disabilities. And we actually had more employees. This was before me, but there's actually more employees working in the group homes than there are at our staff today. So it got very big, very fast in partnering with the mental health system to provide those support services and run those group homes. That ended in the mid 80s, 86, 87, the contract ended with mental health. And I think I've told many of you when I started, it was myself, my secretary, and a half-time bookkeeper is where I started at Dwelling Place in 89. I want to finish with, given our time constraints here, with a final question to each of you. And that is there a person, a place, or some story that really stands out to you that personalizes the reason for Dwelling Place? You know, something you saw change or happen that affected someone or some group of people that really stands out in your head as that your involvement with Dwelling Place.
It looks like you might have Chuck back on the call. Chuck, can you start saying something?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me over the phone?
Yes.
Okay, I've muted my screen. Hopefully you can hear me and we won't be interrupted again. So I'm trying to comment on, follow what was going on while I was trying to get back online, and I'm not sure if you all can hear me. So if somebody could say something that I can hear over the phone, let me try my audio here.
We can hear you well.
Oh, you can? Okay, good. Then I'll go back to muting my screen here. Yeah, the comments, the other things that were going on at the time is that going through the roof. So development wasn't really happening that fast because nobody could borrow any money. One of the creative things we did, again, it was a help with the team we had put together to develop the project. What had happened was that the developers who had been awarded 300 subsidized units to develop housing, assisted housing was called the neighborhood strategic area, could get those. They went around, they were from out of town. One of them had been the former head of MISHDA, one of its founders, along with a friend of his, and they were bidding up buildings on options to do the deal. And they got to the point where they couldn't make the deals work. And they came to us and said, could you help us get the support to make them happen? And I looked at it and I said to my board, there's no reason why we shouldn't just do it. Instead of them coming, taking over, and then leaving town and leaving whatever they leave behind for us to try to sort out. So we made that decision. We went after the subsidies. That's when OAK stepped up and said, well, we had 2 buildings that we were going to develop for parking and a new office for our place to keep us busy during the downturn in construction, but we can't really do anything now because there's no funding, there's no financing. So we put together the first kind of development that used tax-exempt financing permitted by the local unit of government could issue bonds under the Housing Act of 1936. It was a nice little development that my good friend and advisor, Mike Jacobson from another law firm in town, turned us on to, and we ended up putting a very complicated deal together, which involved selling equity in the project, but we maintained control of it. We didn't really need tax benefits. We needed the housing. So it served as a model for other developments around the country. I can remember being given the opportunity to go to New York to see the Ford Foundation to see if they can get us some money for us, and was telling them what we were doing. And they said, you know, you don't need any money from us. You should be showing people around the country how to do this. So that was the real big start in terms of financial independence for Dwelling Place, and got us on the road to other developments that we did. We did get sidetracked by the housing project that we did with Community Mental Health, because they came to us and said they couldn't run it and asked us to take it over. And they had already set up like 16 group homes and from both mentally ill and developmentally disabled adults. And again, we didn't think it was far out of our mission, because given the situation in the neighborhood, there was drug dealing going on, all kinds of other problems, and it wasn't necessarily the safest place for people to live, particularly those who'd be taken advantage of. So we took it on and tried to straighten it out. And as Denny said, that became the biggest source of personnel and stuff, but we got it done. And I left after that because I really got the knack for doing housing development, set up my own company to do that, and did some senior projects, 3 or 4 of them, similar. And that's the turn my life took, until one of the projects I was working on, a hotel also in Hartside, we had funding for and everything, but we were working on parking when the planes hit the Twin Towers. And that with 9/11 was the end of Calati Co. as a ongoing developer. And went to tried to hang in there for a while, after clean up a few projects that I was on, and ended up in Lansing, where I went back into social work for the Salvation Army, doing development work for them, and the rest. And that's how I ended up in Lansing. So I hope that clarifies a few of the things.
Thanks, Chuck. Really appreciate that. It is 3 o'clock right now, but I did want to just sort of do a little bit of wrap up with, if people stay out for a couple of minutes with the questions that were there. A couple of questions came up about the ecumenical formation of Dwelling Place, where that came from. You know, there were the downtown churches and St. Mary's Hospital and Dégagé Ministries. I actually learned just less than a few months ago that it was not only organizational memberships. Dwelling Place, when it was first formed as a membership corporation. And the churches and some of these key institutions like St. Mary's and Dégagé, them were member organizations and had appointments to the board. But there were also individuals. I didn't know that, but there were also individuals that could join and become members. And I believe some of them may have ended up on the board as well. But the ecumenical part of it was, it really has, it's a faith-based origin. And the folks that are here, as you've been hearing from them, are sharing a lot of information about that. The change, it wasn't really it's not like we no longer became faith-based. It's that I think over time we changed from a membership corporation to a directorship corporation. And the reason for that was, when I came, there were only 9 board members on Dwelling Place's board. And a number of them told me they were exhausted. They were just really tired. And it was getting harder and harder at that time to find, except for a few of the key churches like Westminster and the Grave and a few others, to find members where we needed a lot of expertise in. So we ended up, the board agreed to convert to a directorship corporation, which opened up then our ability to be able to go anywhere we needed to go. That was in the early 90s that it changed to a directorship corporation. And even to this day, we've had members from some of those original churches on our boards. We've also had other churches that joined in later. Kyle Irwin is on this call. She is one of our board members, and from St. Mark's Episcopal, and has been on the board longer than anyone else on the board for all these years. And St. Mark's has been a major player involvement with Dwelling Place over the years. So it wasn't a shift from, from being faith-based to not being faith-based. It was really more about changing from a membership corporation to a directorship corporation. And that happened under my watch. So let's wrap it up here. Let me see, I'm looking to see if there's any other questions. One of the questions that was fun to watch, or I think it was Jane responded to, it said the original budget was just over $40,000. So that's pretty remarkable to start off like that with the original budget of just over $40,000. And Yeah, and I'm looking for any other comments or questions that anybody had that we did not answer. Okay, let's close it off then with maybe an opportunity for any one of you, and you don't all have to if you don't want to, but is there some specific memory or something that a person, a place, some story that you'd like to share that really is the essence of why Dwelling Place is here that you recall?
Yeah, I have one regarding, I was working at Calvin College and had hired a student as a coordinator. And eventually she left the college, and I didn't know what happened to her. And I found out that she landed in one of the Dwelling Place's emergency care spaces. And eventually, unfortunately, she died through domestic abuse, and her name was Liz. And so Liz's place was named after her. So I never thought it would serve somebody that I had hired in a whole different context.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I have two memories. One is of Chuck Calati. Of course, he didn't live in our housing, but I remember walking through some of the upstairs of those derelict buildings on the west side of Division Avenue that we were considering or had already committed to. And the upstairs, as I remember right, downstairs they were divided into different shops, most of which were closed. Upstairs you could walk the whole way through, about 3 or 4 different ones. And what I remember is Chuck in these upstairs rooms that hadn't been used for years, and some of them, the roofs were leaking and very derelict, and how excited he was. how he was just looking around and so excited. And then there was that building on the corner of, I think, Division and Wealthy on the west, what would it be, the northwest corner. Same thing with that. He was just so excited walking around in that. And I had that privilege of seeing that. And also the privilege of helping him clean up garbage out behind one of those buildings on the west side of Division that we had. So he was out there, picking up trash and throwing it in a dumpster too. He had that and all the other stuff. And that's, he was, I told him, I think I told him the other day, for at least once in his life, he was an answer to prayer. But then the other person, I'm not even sure he was a resident. There was a youngish man, well, in his 20s maybe, named Robert Zachariah Clark. He was an African-American guy, I'm sure released from the mental hospitals. And I think maybe in one of the old hotels in Hartside neighborhood. And he used to come and talk to me, and he thought he could travel at the speed of thought, and he could see behind this mask of people's faces that they were really wolves or predatory animals, and he had all kinds of that stuff going. But also in some ways, a person to be respected and cared about, and who had potential that, he didn't have the support he needed. And I'm not sure what his relationship ever was to Dwelling Place. He was in the Hartside neighborhood, and he was showing up at church. And I think one day when he was mad, he broke a plate glass window at the church. But I still think of him, and that was probably 1980, so 40 years ago. I wonder what happened to him.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dale.
But when we talk about, getting into the mental illness part being a problem for us, I think it was very much within our vision and our job description at the time.
Thank you, Dale. Chuck, do you have anything you want to share?
Yeah, what Dave said, or not Dave, but Dale, I would agree totally with. We took advantage of any opportunities we had to build up the neighborhood. And if that meant cleaning out a building, and we worked with a lot of other nonprofits that were in the neighborhood at the time. Some of them have moved. Goodwill Industry was there. There was ARC, which was for Association for Development of Disabled People. There was just a ton of different agencies, but we all worked together and found a common goal and took care of it. And we've got students, volunteers from schools and to help out. I can remember cleaning out one of those stores that Dale was talking about, and some young lady was on a ladder and slipped down and fell. I thought, this is the end for me and everybody, because we'd let her get to that position. But she got up and walked away. It was kind of a miracle for me that we didn't run into more problems from that little episode. But we all did what we had to do to make the thing work and to get people housed safely and the neighborhood improved. So I look back on that opportunity fondly, and I miss all the people that were on that board that I served with. After my move here, we kind of lost contact. So it's good to see some of them again.
Yeah.
And then Dave Gibbs, anything you'd like to add to that? Any specific story you want to share?
Yes, yes. That mute button has got me down. So after our first office was in the loft of the sort of a gathering place at Westminster, then Chuck went, we were given the building, I believe, at the, it'd be the northwest corner of Wealthy and Division. And Chuck used that for an office for a while. And I have a memory of a cold winter January morning to come and meet Chuck. And Chuck is sitting in this building at a desk. He's got his snow jacket, or his winter jacket on. He's got gloves on. He's got a stocking cap on. And he's working right away, and that building was cold. And in January in South Division, it was cold. And so that's an indication of his dedication to getting this ministry started. And I think, just to follow up on the question about the churches, I think the churches were no question a strength in what we did. And it was our success in doing it. I had many a night when I would come home from a dwelling place meeting where I couldn't go to sleep, and I had to go to work the next morning and all that, and I couldn't get to sleep, and I would pray for a dwelling place and for the problems to be solved and for us to provide any housing, because at first we didn't have any, of course. And so when Latricia told me the other day that we had 660 living units in the Hartside neighborhood, I became very emotional. I became very emotional and just thought what we were able to do with God's direction and support.
Dave, thank you.
Hey,
for
Denny,
that.
Denny, you haven't mentioned the secretary that has lasted longer than either one of us at your place.
Oh, Karen Lewis. Yeah. You know, Karen will be getting a copy of this. We actually thought about originally putting her on the panel, but we decided to keep it to the founders, the board members and stuff. But Karen, if she was a fly on the wall during that whole time, she only retired a few years ago, about 5 years ago. But she was, she actually had a longer tenure than I will. By the time I retire next year, she was 33 years with the organization. And we still have all of her minutes meticulously stored. And we're going to digitalize all that as part of the archival work for that. But yes, she started the same kinds of conditions that Chuck was in, and suffered through it all during a lot of transition and change over many, many years at Dwelling Place. And you know, we don't want to forget that it wasn't just the board members, but the staff that were working to try to not only create a new organization, but save it sometimes for all these years. So it's a quarter after 3.
I'd just like to mention Bill Duncan.
Go ahead, Dale.
I'd just like to put the name of Bill Duncan out there as one of our founders. At the time, he was a layman, a lay Catholic layman who was working at, I think, Mary Free Bed Hospital.
No, it's St. Mary's.
St. Mary's Hospital. And he was a gentle soul, and he was the one who came up with the dwelling place name. And I understand he's Monsignor Bill Duncan now.
Yes.
But in some ways, he represented the gentle heart of Dwelling Place's hopes for the community, I think. So I just wanted to mention him here.
Thank you for doing that. Actually, he was invited to be on the panel. He was tied up all day today, so he was not able to join us. It's Monsignor Bill Duncan. He's the Vicar General for the Diocese of Grand Rapids. And he's actually helped us to buy back the building at 359 South Division, that one on the corner that all of you have talked about. That Dwelling Place, after Chuck left, Dwelling Place sold that property to the Wege Foundation, which then Peter Wege converted into offices for himself and for Catholic secondary schools. The diocese owned it up until about 3 or 4 years ago when they put it up for sale. It was actually S.J. Wasinski that was listing it, called Marianne Wasinski, who used to be on our board, called us. And I immediately called Monsignor Duncan to say, hey, don't sell it to anybody else. Please sell it to us because we own everything in that block now. And it was Monsignor Duncan who intervened and helped us to acquire that property right now. And we are now actually in negotiation with the African American History Museum as a possible future site for their operations in that building, which is, I think, a timely and prophetic way to end up for that building in the future if we're successful in doing that. So I want to thank everybody here. I want to thank the board members and staff that are on the call right now. Hopefully you pulled something out of this that helps you to kind of keep going and increases your fortitude to make this organization an even better organization in the future for others to come. I want to thank the original board members and Chuck especially. And I mentioned Chuck's role in my life. You know, Chuck was really a mentor to me. He pulled me into the Catholic Human Development Office. I did a graduate internship with him, wrote a few grants and things, and he saw something in me that maybe others couldn't see or didn't see, and brought me in. And I ended up taking his place at Catholic Human Development Office and coming back over to Dwelling Place. So it looks a little strange that I follow him everywhere. I didn't end up going to Lansing, but I want to thank Chuck for giving me a shot and at trying to do this. And I'd like to finish with a poem. It's the author's unknown, but it's it's really about all the amazing, challenging, unbelievable things that people can do and we can do as an organization if we just try to look beyond what seems like a realistic possibility. Most of what Dwelling Place has accomplished over the years starts off looking like, are you crazy? Why are we doing this? And I think that's the enthusiasm that Chuck had going through empty buildings. Some of my staff know that I have the same kind of enthusiasm when I see pigeon poop in old buildings and things like this. I get just as excited today as I did way back when, and looking at what the possibilities are. So hopefully my successor in July will feel the same way, whoever he or she is. But here's the author's unknown. You mustn't quit. When things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the roads you're trudging seem all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high, and you want to smile, but you have to sigh. When care is pressing you down a bit, rest, if you must, but never quit. Life is queer with its twists and turns, as every one of us sometimes learns, and many a failure turns about when he might have won if he'd stuck it out. Stick to your task, though the pace seems slow, you may succeed with one more blow. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver tint of the clouds of doubt, and you never can tell how close you are. It may be near when it seems afar, so stick to the fight when you're the hardest hit. It's when things seem worst that you mustn't quit. Thanks everybody for being on this call, and it is recorded, so we'll have an opportunity to share this with anybody, including the poem. I already see somebody wants to chat. The poem, we'll make sure that gets around to everybody as well. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Before we go, I just want to mention we are celebrating a couple of anniversaries. I put those in the chat, so be sure to wish Crystal, Rebecca, Rachel, and Christina a happy anniversary at some point for their many years of dedication to Dwelling Place.
Thanks, Latricia. Bye, everybody.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
Thank you, Denny, for putting this on, and great to see you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all for being here.
It's been a real blessing.
Really special.
Stay in touch.
Sure.
Somehow, especially you, Dan. Thanks, Latricia.
Yeah, you're welcome.
That was great.
I was going to make sure you're all okay with me adding you to our newsletter so you can stay up to date on what we're doing. It's just an e-newsletter we send out. So if you're all okay with that, I'll make sure to add you in.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yes.
Great.
Yep.
I did it yesterday, so don't do a dupe.
Okay, it will tell me if it's duplicated.
All right.
Well, thank you again all for
Okay.
being here. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Good to
All right.
see all you old timers too, as well as the young folks, the new folks.
Be in touch. Chuck, are you
Some of
in
you guys are parting your hair like I am.
Hey, I have pictures of people with hair if you want to see them.